And Senator Feinstein's amendment would ensure the requirement of military detention of terrorism suspects does not apply domestically. As chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I'm a proud co-sponsor of her position, and I support it. And, Mr. President, I ask my whole statement be made part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And, Mr. President, I know Senator Durbin is next to be. Mr. President, I understand from Senator Durbin the distinguished senator from Missouri is going next, and in any event, I yield the floor. And I thank my colleague for the courtesy.
The senator from Missouri is recognized.
President, I'd like unanimous consent to address the Senate for 10 minutes under morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I appreciate my good friend from Illinois allowing me to go ahead and talk about the defense bill at this time, but doing it in the context of where we are on the floor right now. Mr. President, defending the country is the Congress's most important constitutional responsibility. Abraham Lincoln said that government should do for people only those things that people cannot better do for themselves. And if there's anything at the top of that list, this is at the top of that list. So it's critical, Mr. President, that we have this discussion, that we pass this bill as soon as possible in order to give our men and women in uniform the tools they need to do their job and the certainty we need to know how that job is going to be done from the point of view of what the government can and needs to provide. While this bill we're debating today is only about next year's defense program, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that our budget environment is more challenged all the time, and whether the automatic budget cuts to future defense fines happen or not, we do know that we're going to have to be more thoughtful, more cautious about how we get the most for our investment in defense. You know, everybody else in America has spent the last 20 years figuring out how you focus on a better result for less investment, and defense is going to have to be there as well, but still, that doesn't mean it's not a top priority for the federal government. I appreciate the work that my friends Senator Levin and Senator McCain have done to get this bill to the floor. I'm proud to represent a state that is really involved in our national defense. Missouri is the home of Fort Leonard Wood, of Whiteman Air Force Base, of the Marine Corps Mobilization Command Center in Kansas City. We have dozens of National Guard and Reserve facilities in our state. Our state has 17,184 active duty soldiers, Marines, and airmen right now, 34,000 Guard and Reservists. We're the home of large and small defense contractors that provide thousands of jobs in our state, and those defense contractors can do their work better, and our defense dollars are better spent if we know what the plan is. And the only real way to know what the plan is to have an authorization bill that works. Since the beginning of Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraq Freedom, 134 Missourians have given their lives. Over 1,000 have been wounded in the line of duty. And in fact, one of the amendments that I have that I hope it finds its way into this bill is just research associated with rehabilitating those wounded warriors who have eye injuries. Thousands of vision-related injuries have occurred as a result of the wars we're fighting now. Tremendous work is being done by St. John's Hospital and Missouri State University in Springfield to see what can be done to develop better ways to deal with those eye wounds, with IEDs as a principal tool of our enemies, of our opponents, our enemies in this war. Your eyes are the hardest thing to ultimately protect, and of every wounded warrior, 12% of them have eye wounds, and hopefully we can look to see what we can do to make greater protection and greater recovery from those wounds. I join all Missourians in thanking those who serve. I think all of us will show a greater commitment to those who serve by actually having a defense authorization bill that sets out a plan for the future. Mr. President, I'm particularly pleased that this bill contains funding for modifications of the B-2 bombers' mixed loading capacity. Most of our stealth bombers operate out of Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and we discovered as recently as Libya that operations with our B-2 bombers aren't as efficient as they need to be or could be simply by making that loading capacity work differently. That's the kind of thing we're going to have to do as we look at more difficult-to-get defense dollars. We're going to have to figure out how we spend those defense dollars in the best possible way. I hope the Senate language, as it's in the bill now, prevails in a final bill. I also want to call attention to the bill's full authorization of the development of the next generation long-range strike bomber, and I'm pleased that with the funding this bill has for maintenance facility at Fort Leonard Wood and weapons storage at Whiteman. I've filed a few amendments in this bill, and I'll just mention a couple. One is I'm working with Senator Gillibrand for an amendment where National Guard soldiers are entitled to the same domestic emergency job protection and employment rights as others do when they come back. Senator Gillibrand and I have also worked on a bill to ensure that people in the Guard and Reserve and their families have access to financial and marital and other kinds of counseling as they try to put their other life back together. I want to thank my colleagues for bringing this bill to the floor. We face a wide variety of threats today, including some that are new and constantly evolving. Cyber warfare, WMD, all things that we need to take seriously. This is a principal responsibility of the federal government. I am looking forward to seeing this bill pass the Senate today and then to work with the House to get a bill on the President's desk so that all that are involved in the defense of the country know what the long-term plan is, and I would yield the floor, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The System Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, I thank my colleague from Missouri, and I certainly concur with his comments about our American military. We have the best in the world. These men and women serve us well, with courage and honor every day, and we are fortunate to have them. We are fortunate, those of us who enjoy the blessings of liberty and the safety of this nation, to have men and women willing to risk their lives for America. This underlying bill, this Department of Defense Authorization Bill, is a bill that authorizes the continued operations of our military, and every year we pass this bill, as we should, in a timely manner. I have supported it consistently over the years with very few exceptions and believe that the work product brought to us by Senators Levin and McCain is excellent, bipartisan, and moves us in a direction toward an even safer America. And I thank them for all the work they put into it. But there are provisions within this bill today which trouble me greatly, provisions which I hope that members of the Senate will reflect on, one in particular that I'll address at this time. Senator Feinstein is offering amendment number 1125, and I'm a co-sponsor. I would say that this amendment raises a serious question about Section 1032 in this bill. I am concerned that this section would limit the flexibility of any president to fight terrorism. I'm concerned that it will create uncertainty for law enforcement, intelligence, and our military regarding how to handle suspected terrorists. And I think it raises fundamental and serious constitutional concerns. This provision, 1032, would, for the first time in the history of the United States, require our military to take custody of certain terrorism suspects in the United States. On its face, that doesn't sound offensive, but in fact, it creates a world of problems. Where do we start this debate? We understand the responsibility of Congress in passing laws and the President with the option to sign those laws or veto them, and the courts with the responsibility to interpret them. When it comes to the protection of this country and fighting terrorism, most of us have felt that this is primarily an executive function under presidents of both political parties. We may disagree from time to time on Patriot Act and other aspects of it and debate those things, but by and large, I think we have ceded to presidents of both parties the power to protect America. My colleague and friend, Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican of South Carolina, on September 19, 2007, stated, and he states things very colorfully and clearly, he said, "The last thing we need in any war is to have the ability of 535 people who are worried about the next election to be able to micromanage how you fight the war. This is not only micromanagement, this is a constitutional shift of power. That was Senator Graham's statement in 2007. Though I would carefully and jealously guard the constitutional responsibility of Congress when it comes to the declaration of war, even the waging of war, I do believe there's a line that we should honor. We should not stop our president, those who work for him, in keeping America safe by second-guessing decisions to be made. Today, again, on the Republican side of the aisle, came colleagues who make the argument that it is a serious mistake for us to take a suspected terrorist and put them into our criminal justice system. They argue that the last thing in the world you want to do is to take a suspected terrorist and read them their constitutional rights, the right to remain silent. Everything you say can be used against you, the right to counsel. They argue that's when terrorists will clam up and stop talking. Therefore, they argue, suspected terrorists should be transferred to military jurisdictions where Miranda rights will not be read. On its face, it sounds like a reasonable conclusion. In fact, it is not. It is not. Since 9/11, we have arrested and detained 300 suspected terrorists, read them their Miranda rights, and then went on to prosecute them successfully and incarcerate them. They cooperated with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They gave information, in many cases gave volumes of information, even after having been read their rights. So to argue that it can't be done or should not be done is to ignore the obvious. 300 times we have successfully prosecuted suspected terrorists, and America has remained safe for these 10 years plus since 9/11. How many have been prosecuted under military tribunals in that period of time? 6. And 3 have been released. So we are keeping this country safe by giving to the President and those who work for the President in the military, intelligence, and law enforcement community the option to decide the best course of action when it comes to arresting, detaining, investigating, and prosecuting an individual. Remember the man who was on the plane flying into Detroit a couple years ago? Tried to detonate a bomb on the plane. His clothing caught fire and the other passengers subdued him, restrained him. He was arrested, investigated by the FBI, and read his Miranda rights. Within a day, his parents were brought over. The following day, he decided to cooperate with the United States and told us everything he knew. At the end of the day, he was prosecuted, brought to trial, and pled guilty. He went through our regular criminal court system, though he wasn't an American citizen, and he was successfully prosecuted. President Obama had the right to decide what was the best thing to do to keep America safe, and he did it. Why would we want to tie his hands? Now let me talk to you about this section, 1032, and why it is a serious mistake. 1032 in this bill would, for the first time in American history, require the military to take custody of certain terrorism suspects in the United States. From a practical point of view, it could be a deadly mistake for us to require this. Listen to what was said by the Justice Department in explaining why. While the legislation proposes a waiver in certain circumstances to address concerns, this proposal inserts confusion and bureaucracy when FBI agents and counterterrorism prosecutors are making split-second decisions. In a rapidly developing situation like that involving Najibullah Zazi, traveling to New York in September of 2009 to plant a bomb on the New York subway, they need to be completely focused on incapacitating the terrorist suspect and gathering critical intelligence about his plans. And instead, this provision, 1032, written into this law, would require a handoff of terrorism suspects to military authorities. So what does our military think about this? Well, the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, made it abundantly clear when he said, the failure of the revised text to clarify that Section 1032 applying to individuals captured abroad, as we've urged, may needlessly complicate efforts by frontline law enforcement professionals to collect critical intelligence concerning operations and activities within the United States. What we've seen then is our Secretary of Defense telling us Ceding to the military this authority could compromise America's security at a critical moment when every second counts, when the gathering of intelligence could literally save not just a life, but thousands of lives. Now, Senator Feinstein's amendment makes it clear, as the administration wants to make it clear, that those terrorism suspects who are arrested abroad will be detained by the military. But within the United States, we are told by this administration this provision will jeopardize the security of our country, will require a procedure now to hand off these individuals to the military side in places where they couldn't possibly be handed off quickly or seamlessly. We have 10,000 FBI agents dedicated to the security of this country when it comes to these national security issues, and 56 different offices, and we don't have anything near that capacity when it comes to the military picking up the interrogation of an individual who may have knowledge that, if we can glean it from that person, could save thousands of lives. Why in the world do we want to tie the hands of law enforcement? Why do we want to tie the hands of the intelligence community? Why do we want to create this situation of giving to the military this responsibility when they're not prepared at this moment to take it? I think Senator Feinstein's doing the right thing for the protection of this country. Her position is supported not only by the Attorney General, by the Secretary of Defense, and by the intelligence community. They have done a good job keeping America safe. They have asked us, please, do not micromanage, do not presume, do not create another hurdle for us when it comes to gathering information that can save lives in America. Why would we do that? After more than 10 years of success in avoiding another 9/11, let us not make the situation worse by this 1032, this section of the bill that is being presented to us. I know you'll hear arguments on the floor. Well, there are opportunities here for a waiver. A waiver. So if a person is detained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, then it's determined that this is a suspect that falls in the category and needs to go to military detention, then we need to turn to the executive side for a waiver of that military detention. How much time will be lost? Minutes? Hours? Days? Could you afford that if what is at stake is the potential loss of thousands of American lives? Why? Why make it more complex? I can't understand why the other side of the aisle is now so determined with this president, to micromanage the defense of this country when it comes to terrorism. When it was a Republican president, any suggestions along those lines were dismissed as unpatriotic and unwise and illogical. Now, under this president, everything's fair game. They want to change the rules which have successfully protected the United States for more than 10 years. I urge my colleagues to support Senator Feinstein's Amendment 1125. Amend this Section 1032. Make sure that our Defense Department, military and law enforcement, as well as intelligence community, have the tools that they need to continue to keep America safe.
Senator's time has expired.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous. I'll be glad to yield to the I was going to ask and will ask, Mr. President, the unanimous consent that I be recognized to speak as if in morning business for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senior Senator from Michigan.
Not on the bill yet. We're just in morning business. Just ask for 10 minutes.
Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that when we return to the bill, which would be immediately after Senator Cornyn, that then we move immediately to the Feinstein Amendment number 1125, and that there be a 30-minute of debate, evenly divided, and that the vote would occur immediately following.
Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to talk about something that is all too rare, and that is bipartisan support for an important piece of legislation that not only fulfills America's commitments to our ally, Taiwan, under the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, but helps stabilize a critical region of the world, and that would be in Asia, and particularly the growing tensions between Taiwan and China, and also creates jobs here in America by facilitating military sales of things made here in America by Americans that we are going to sell to people in other countries, our friends in other countries, for cash and doesn't cost taxpayers a penny. My amendment 1200 is pending before the Senate, and I was pleased in introducing this amendment to be joined by several of my colleagues on a bipartisan basis: Senator Menendez from New Jersey, Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma, Senator Lieberman from Connecticut, Senator Wyden from Oregon, and Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut. This amendment is straightforward and simple. It would require the President to carry out the sale of 66 F-16 C and D aircraft to Taiwan. These are American-made fighters our Democratic ally in Taiwan has been trying to purchase since 2007. As I said earlier, this is a win-win amendment. It reflects the right national security policy. It's good for our American economy and jobs. And we know that Taiwan's Air Force continues to deteriorate. But first, let me just remind my colleagues what Taiwan is looking at in terms of the disparity in combat aircraft between Communist China and Democratic Taiwan. Communist China has roughly 2,300 operational combat aircraft. Our ally and friend, Democratic Taiwan, has 490 operational combat aircraft. Obviously a growing imbalance in the Taiwan Strait. But that only tells part of the story, because as my colleagues also know, as this chart indicates, the incredible shrinking Taiwan Air Force, that much of Taiwan's combat aircraft are F-5 aircraft, which America has previously sold to Taiwan, but which are now becoming older and more obsolete as time goes by, as well as French Mirage 5000 or 2000 aircraft. And as this chart indicates, roughly around close to 2020, maybe even before, these aircraft are become completely obsolete, and you'll see the huge cliff and, in fact, exacerbate the disparity between Communist China and our Democratic ally, Taiwan. This F-16 sale would be an export-driven job machine for our country at a time when unemployment's at 9%, and when the #1 issue on America's agenda is job creation. People without jobs can't pay their mortgage and they lose their home due to foreclosure. Why in the world, when this sale would support jobs in 32 different states and the District of Columbia, would anyone object to this amendment? And indeed, as I indicated, I believe there is strong bipartisan support for it. This sale would support more than 60 job years of employment, generate some $8.7 billion in economic output, and you know what? It would also generate $768 million in taxes for the federal government. As I indicated, Taiwan's Air Force is facing a looming fighter shortfall. And the fact of the matter is this falls squarely in Congress's wheelhouse. The Taiwan Relations Act that I referred to earlier, 1979, signed by President Jimmy Carter with bipartisan support, requires the United States government to provide Taiwan, our friend and ally, with the defense articles necessary for them to defend itself against communist Chinese aggression. And it instructs the President and the Congress to determine the nature and quantity of such defense articles based on their judgment of the needs of Taiwan. 47 Democrats and Republicans in the United States Senate, almost half, have signed a letter to the President of the United States supporting this sale. In the House of Representatives, 181 Democrats and Republicans have signed a letter to the President supporting this sale. The Senate, as you'll recall, Madam President, in September previously voted on an amendment like this in the Trade Adjustment Authority Assistance Bill, which ended up at a 48-48 tie. Although the bill had strong bipartisan support, some of my colleagues said they preferred not to offer that amendment on that particular legislative vehicle, but said that if I came back on an appropriate legislative vehicle, they would support it. And if there's a more appropriate legislative vehicle than the Defense Authorization Bill, I hope someone would point that out to me. This is the appropriate vehicle. This is the appropriate time. This is the right thing to do for job creation in America. It's the right thing to do in terms of our national security and stability in Asia. And that's why I believe that this is an appropriate time for us to take up this amendment. I was advised, Madam President, that by the parliamentarian post-cloture that my original amendment as drafted would not be germane post-cloture. However, in consultation with the parliamentarian, we've come up with a technical modification which essentially would strike what I would call what are called the findings that would support the need for the legislation, but it's in essence strike the A section and the B section and leave only the C section remaining. This, of course, at this point in their proceedings would require unanimous consent, and in consultation with Senator McCain, the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I'm advised that our friends across the aisle will not grant unanimous consent for us to modify really what is a technical modification for this amendment so we can get a vote on it. I realize at this point that we are in morning business and it's not appropriate perhaps for me to ask unanimous consent, but I will ask unanimous consent at a later and appropriate time, and because I'd like to get an explanation from the distinguished chairman of the Armed Services Committee why in the world why there would be an objection to a bill that enjoys such broad bipartisan support on a clearly appropriate legislative vehicle. Madam President, I do see the distinguished chairman on the floor, and so I would, at this time, if it's appropriate, to ask unanimous consent to modify my pending amendment to strike the findings under Section A and under Section B and to leave Section C, which is the states in full, sale of aircraft, the President shall carry out the sale of no fewer than 66 F-16 C and D multi-role fighter aircraft to Taiwan. We've been advised by the parliamentarian that that is indeed germane and would be eligible for a vote, and with that modification, so I ask unanimous consent to so modify my amendment.
Madam President.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The senator from Michigan.
Madam President, there is objection on this side, and I will attempt to bring together the Senator Cornyn with the objectors so that he can hear from them why they object, but in the meantime, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
The senator from Arizona. Senator from Texas.
That's close.
We're close to Arizona. Madam President, I'm disappointed, but more than disappointed, I look forward to that explanation. I hope it will be there'll be an opportunity to have a colloquy and a discussion here on the floor so the American people can see why when a piece of legislation that enjoys such broad bipartisan support can't even get a vote. When people watch what's happening in Washington these days, I think they're tempted to avert their gaze because they ask the question of me, and I'm sure when Madam President, when you're back in North Carolina, people will say, why can't people get anything done? Well, it's because, unfortunately, of things like this. These are technical objections that are not based on the substance or the merits of the legislation. I respect the chairman of the Armed Services Committee says there's an objection on the Democratic side, and he is personally not making that objection, but is on behalf of some unnamed other party. I hope that person will be named I hope they will come to the floor. I hope they will explain to the American people and to our Democratic allies in Taiwan why it is they object to a vote on this amendment. I do believe that if we are able to get a vote on the defense authorization bill, that this has a high likelihood of passage, and I think would send a strong message to our friends and allies around the world that, yes, you can count on your friend and ally, the United States of America. Conversely, if we are thwarted in our attempt to try to get this amendment voted on and passed, then this will send a countervailing message that you cannot depend on America, and it will embolden bullies around the world.
Madam President,
Senator from Michigan.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of the pending Feinstein Amendment, number 1125, that there be 30 minutes for debate equally divided, controlled in the usual form, that upon the use or yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to vote in relation to the Feinstein Amendment with no amendments in order prior to the vote.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1867, which the clerk will report.
Counter number 230, S. 1867, a bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2012 for military activities of the Department of Defense for military construction and so forth and other purposes.
Under the previous order, there will be 30 minutes of debate under the Feinstein Amendment. The Senator from Arizona.
Madam President, before we begin the debate, could I, and with the Senator from California on the floor, the benefit of our colleagues and the Chairman, there are two pending Feinstein amendments, as I understand it. The Senator from California has agreed to the half-hour equally divided, as the Chair just said, and then I understand the Senator from California would have agreed to the second amendment at 4 p.m. That's correct. So prior to that, I would ask my friend the Chairman if we could have an hour starting at 3 of equally divided debate before the vote at 4 on the second Feinstein Amendment.
Reserving the right to object, I obviously don't intend to. I'm just wondering whether or not the Senator from California then understands that the vote on the second Feinstein Amendment would be at 4 and that the debate would begin at 3 with that hour equally divided.
I do. I have a Four Corners meeting on the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill. That's my problem. So the later it is, the better it is for me.
So is a 4 o'clock vote after an hour debate acceptable?
My understanding is that the House Chairman only has till 3 o'clock, but I anticipate we will take all that time.
Well, my question...
So I can't change it now.
It's agreeable then that there be an hour debate on your second amendment starting at 3 with a vote scheduled at 4.
I'll do my best.
And then I would also add to that there be no second-degree amendments in order to the second Feinstein amendment.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Texas.
I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
Senator from Arizona.
Then we can call a vote at any particular time. So I would suggest again that we try to dispose of other amendments after the vote on Feinstein and amendment and the first one, and then we will try to dispose of additional amendments between the disposition of the first Feinstein amendment and the second one.
She has half her time. Let her start.
Pardon me. With the hour debate equally divided. And Senator Feinstein.
Madam President.
The senator from California.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise to ask my colleagues to support Amendment number 1125, which will limit mandatory military custody to terrorists captured outside the United States. This amendment is co-sponsored by Senators Reid, Casey, Shaheen, Leahy, Durbin, Udall, Kirk, Lee, Harkin, and Webb. Madam President, this is a very simple amendment. It adds only one word, the word abroad, to Section 1032 of the underlying bill. I strongly believe if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And the ability to have maximum flexibility in the United States is very important, and I totally support the executive having that flexibility. This bill creates a presumption that members or parts of al-Qaeda or associated forces will be held in the military system. And that's what concerns me, because the military system has not really produced very well over the last 10 years. And I want to take a moment to contrast some cases. On this chart, we have sentences, 5 of them, with military commissions, and 5 or 6 from federal courts. The federal courts have actually convicted over the last 10, 11 years, not 300 people, but 400 people. Military commissions are really limited to some 6 convictions. And let's take a look at what they are. A very famous one is Salim Hamdan, because he brought a Supreme Court case. He was bin Laden's driver. He was acquitted of conspiracy, only convicted of material support for terrorism, and he received a 5-month sentence by a military commission and was sent back to his home in Yemen to serve time before being released in January of '09. Number 2, David Hicks, entered into a plea on material support for terrorism, was given a 9-month sentence, mostly served back home in Australia. Omar Khadr pled guilty in exchange for an 8-year sentence, but he will likely be transferred to a Canadian prison. Ibrahim Ahmed Mahmoud Al-Kozi pled guilty to conspiracy and material support to terrorism. His final sentence was 2 years pursuant to a plea deal. Noor Uthman Mohammed pled guilty to conspiracy and material support to terrorism. His final sentence will be less than 3 years pursuant to his plea agreement. Ali Hamza Abahol received a life sentence after he boycotted the entire commission process. On the other hand, you have sentences from the federal courts. You have Richard Ree, the shoe bomber, life in prison. Blind Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, life in prison for the plot to bomb New York City. 20th hijacker, Zacharias Moussaoui, life in prison. Ramzi Youssef, life in prison for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and the Manila air plot. Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, probably life in prison, will be sentenced in January 2012. And Nazi Bulabzazi, potential life in prison. This was the man with conspirators who was going to bomb the New York subway. There is definitive evidence that is irrefutable that the federal courts have done a much better job than the military commissions. Why this constant press that if it's not broke, we're going to fix it anyway, I don't understand. Why the constant push to put people in military custody rather than provide the flexibility so that evidence can be evaluated quickly? This person will get life in a federal court versus an inability or a problem in a military commission, or vice versa. I think the executive should have that. And I think the last 10 years have clearly shown that this country is safer than it has ever been. Terrorists are behind bars where they belong, and plots have been thwarted. So the system is working. This amendment would make clear that under Section 1032, United States Armed Forces are only required to hold a suspected terrorist in military custody when he is captured abroad. All that amendment does is add one word, and that's the word abroad, to make clear that the military will not be roaming our streets looking for suspected terrorists. The amendment does not remove the President's ability to use the option of military detention or prosecution inside the United States. The administration has threatened to veto this bill, has said, and I quote, "It strongly objects to the military custody provision of Section 1032 because it would tie the hands of intelligence and law enforcement professionals." Perhaps most importantly, addressing the issue of this amendment specifically, on November 15th, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta wrote this, and I quote, "The failure of the revised text to clarify that Section 1032 applies to individuals captured abroad may needlessly complicate efforts by frontline law enforcement professionals to collect critical intelligence concerning operations and activities within the United States." The Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, also wrote a letter, November 23rd, to say that he opposes the detainee provisions of this bill because they could, and I quote, "restrict the ability of our nation's intelligence professionals to acquire valuable intelligence and prevent future terrorist attacks." The administration suggested this change to the Armed Services Committee, but it was rejected, and so the administration has had to threaten a veto on the bill. I mean, who knows whether they will? I certainly don't know. This amendment, limiting mandatory military custody to detainees outside the United States, is a major improvement to the bill, and I ask my colleagues to support it. I have a very hard time because I have watched detainees carefully as part of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and we are doing a study on the detention and treatment of high-value detainees. This has been going on for 2 years now. It's going to be a 4,000-page document, and it's going to be classified, but it will document what was actually done with each of the high-value detainees and what was learned from them. And it shows some very interesting things. But the upshot of all of this is that we should keep military custody to people arrested abroad and have the wide option in this country, which is the case now, and not mandate that military custody and military commission trial must be for everyone arrested in the United States. I mean, you will hear that anyone who comes to the United States, who carries out a criminal act, a terrorist act, under the laws of war, really should be subject to military custody. The problem is 10 years of experience hasn't worked. How many years' experience do we need? How many sentences? 6 cases. And this is all there is in 10 years. I know the other side got very upset when Abdul Muttalib was Mirandized. The fact of the matter is, every belief is Abdul Muttalib is going to do a life sentence in a federal prison, put away somewhere in a place where he cannot escape and where the treatment is very serious. I think I just have, again, a hard time knowing why, if it's not broke, we need to fix it, and why we need to subject everybody that might be arrested in this country to a record that's like this: 5-month sentence, 9-month sentence, 8-year sentence, 2-year sentence, 3 years pursuant to a plea agreement, and 1 life sentence. When you have 400 cases that have been disposed of in a prompt way in a federal court who are serving long sentences in federal prison. So I would like to hold the remainder of my time and have an opportunity to respond to the distinguished chairman and ranking member.
Madam President.
The senator from Arizona.
Madam President, I'd like to yield.
Before the senator yields to the senator.
The senator from Michigan.
Would you refrain just for 1 minute while Senator Feinstein's here? I understand that it is now preferable from our leader that the vote be at 2 o'clock, not immediately following this half-hour debate.
If that's possible, that would be helpful, but, you know,
is that all right?
Okay, all right.
All right. So now if you would yield on this. Madam President, I would ask unanimous consent that the vote, which was previously scheduled at the end of the half-hour debate on this amendment, now be rescheduled for 2 o'clock.
Is there objection? Seeing none, so ruled.
Now, Madam President, relative to the time between that half hour and 2 o'clock, that time hopefully would be used. It will be by me for my remarks on this amendment, by the way, and because after the 30 minutes, if it's used totally, I would want an opportunity to speak during that period of time, as if necessary in morning business. There are other amendments that we believe can be voice voted during that period of time. I believe my friend from Arizona would agree, so that time will be fruitfully used. But the time now is 2 o'clock for the vote on that first Feinstein amendment. I thank my friend.
And Madam President.
Senator from Arizona.
The vote will be to senators from New Hampshire and South Carolina would like to speak. I don't know if the chairman would like to be before or during that or in between, but also it does not change the agreement that we have, which has not been agreed to, but we have agreed that we will attempt to have a vote on the second Feinstein amendment at 4 still. Is that correct? We will attempt to do that.
That will continue to be our intent. It was objected to before, but we hope that objection will be removed. But if it's not removed, we just will have to have all these votes at the end of the day instead of during the day.
And so, beginning at 3, whether we have a unanimous consent agreement, because the Feinstein amendment is very important, I would ask that informally, if we do not have a unanimous consent agreement, that we have an hour equally divided beginning at 3 so that we can debate the second Feinstein amendment. In the meantime, as the chairman said, we will try to dispense with unanimous with voice votes and other agreed upon amendments, and perhaps even maybe a recorded vote if necessary on one of the amendments. I would just remind my colleagues that we run out of time at 6 o'clock this evening, and we'd rather do it in a measured fashion, allowing recorded votes or debate before those recorded votes, because those pending amendments will be voted on after 6 p.m. Tonight. So I hope that I didn't say anything the chairman doesn't agree with.
Madam President.
Senator from Michigan.
Madam President, no, I agree with what you said and what the intent is here, that hopefully we could have an hour debate starting at 3. We'll try to lock that in at a later time after giving folks notice. But if there's objection to votes before the time runs out, the 30-hour clock runs out, then we have to have all those votes after the 30-hour clock runs out, and it doesn't make any sense to do that. But if there's going to be an objection, then that's the way it will have to be. What Senator McCain is saying, and I totally agree with him, is even if we're put in that position, which I hope we're not, that at least we could use the time between now and then for debate on those amendments, which we would then have to vote on at a later time. And I totally agree with my friend from Arizona.
Madam President, I
Senator from Arizona.
Yield 7 minutes to the senator from New Hampshire and 8 minutes to the senator from South Carolina.
The senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in opposition to the amendment offered by the senator from California, Amendment 1125. And I would start with this. We've heard repeatedly, not only from the senator from California, but also from the senator in Illinois, about the number of cases in our civilian system where we've tried terrorists versus the number of military commissions. I think there's one thing that needs to be clarified up front here, that one of the first acts that the President took when he came into office was to actually suspend all military commissions for about 2 years. So to compare the number of cases in our civilian system versus the number of military commission trials we've had is just a false comparison when we suspended these trials for over 2 years. I just want to say that up front, but I think the chart that the Senator shows actually misses the point of why we have this amendment before us, and that is we need to gather intelligence. When we have captured a member of al-Qaeda who is planning an attack against the United States of America, the first goal has to be obviously getting that person away from where he can threaten us again to kill Americans, but also just as importantly to gather intelligence to protect America. The criminal justice system is set up to see that justice is served in a particular case, not to see that we have the maximum tools on the hands of our intelligence officials to gather information. Yet it seems to me that if you look in context of Senator Feinstein's Amendment 1126 that we've already talked about on the floor, she wants to limit the administration, the case law that our Supreme Court that's going back to World War II would take us before 9/11, and heaven forbid if we had an American citizen who was one of the participants in an incident like we had occur on our soil on 9/11, our military would not be permitted to hold that person and to question them to get the maximum amount of information to protect our country. And with respect to this amendment that she has pending before the committee, before the floor, 1125, just want to point out that the amendment would lead to a very, very absurd result. Essentially, what it would say is if you are a member of al-Qaeda planning or committing an attack against the United States of America, a foreigner, and you make it to our soil, as the 9/11 conspirators did, who committed that horrible attack on our country, then you cannot be held in military custody. There's no mandatory military custody under those circumstances. Yet we will hold you in mandatory military custody if you are found overseas. So in other words, please, their goal is unfortunately to come to the homeland, to come to our country to attack us here. And in our country, we need the authority to, in the first instance, the presumption should be to hold those individuals in military custody so that we aren't reading them Miranda rights. To tell a terrorist you have the right to remain silent is counter to what we need to do to protect Americans and make sure that, for example, I will use the Christmas Day bomber as an example because it's been cited so many times here on this floor. That day, when he was found on the plane, after 50 minutes of questioning, he was read his Miranda rights and he invoked his Miranda rights and remained silent. It was only 5 weeks later, after we tracked down his parents and convinced him to cooperate, that he actually provided more information. We are very fortunate that he was only involved in one event, that it wasn't a 9/11 type event where there were multiple events on American soil planned. But what if after that 50 minutes we waited five weeks to get more information, yet there had been more events coming that day? That is what is at issue here. And can you imagine that if we had caught, let's bring ourselves back to September 11th, what if we had caught the individuals who were on one of those planes before it took off on 9/11? And what if, in that instance, to say that we would not hold those members of al-Qaeda in military custody that instant to make sure that we could get the maximum amount of information from them to hopefully, God forbid, prevent the lifting off of the other flights and what happened on that horrible day in our country's history. I have to believe that if we were standing here immediately after the events of 9/11, I do not think that we would be debating this amendment, deciding whether or not, if you make it to our homeland, we will not hold you in military custody as the first instance to find out how much information you have to make sure that you are not part of multiple attacks on the United States of America. If the senator from California's amendment passes, what kind of message are we saying to members of al-Qaeda, foreigners who are planning attacks against the United States of America? We're laying out, unfortunately, in my view, a welcome mat to say, if you make it to America, you won't be held in military custody. But if you attack us overseas, then you will be held in military custody. Why would we create a dual standard where we should be prioritizing protecting our homeland, protecting the United States of America? This leads to an absurd result. And I would hope that my colleagues would reject the senator's amendment to say that only those members of al-Qaeda who don't make it to our homeland to attack us right here on our soil will be held in the first instance in mandatory military custody, because our goal has to be here to protect Americans and to make sure that we don't create a dual standard where if you're captured over there, we're going to hold you in military custody, but if you're captured and you make it here, you're going to be getting greater rights. We'll treat you in the civilian system, and we'll tell you, you have the right to remain silent. We should not be telling terrorists they have the right to remain silent. We should be protecting Americans. And if we were to pass this amendment, it would create an absurd standard where you get greater rights when you are here on our soil. And I don't think that, I think that makes us less safe. And I would urge my colleagues to reject both of the senator's amendments, both 1126 that would deny the executive branch the authority to hold.
The senator's time has expired.
I thank you, Madam President, for this, and I would ask for 30 seconds just to wrap up. Unanimous consent for 30 seconds.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I would ask my colleagues to reject 1126 as well, which would take away the authority of the executive branch as allowed by our Supreme Court, and would bring us back, would make us less safe in this country, as well as 1125. We have to protect America and make sure that we get the maximum information to prevent future attacks on this country.
Madam President.
Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
How much time
Senator from California.
Thank you. How much time do I have?
The senator has 3 minutes remaining of the original 30 minutes.
Well, thank you very much.
For one moment.
Yes.
The senator from Michigan.
Well, not on my time.
For a question.
On your time.
On my time. After the 30 minutes expires, because we're not going to have a vote now, there would be additional time should you need it after that 30-minute period.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. I may well use it. Madam President, I really object to the statement just made that this will make the United States of America less safe. 10 years of experience has shown that it has not. Plot after plot after plot has been interrupted. I have served on the Intelligence Committee for 11 years now. We follow this closely. This country is much more safe because things have finally come together with a process that is working. The FBI has a National Security Division with 10,000 people. There are 56 FBI offices. Military doesn't have offices to make arrests around this country. And this constant push that everything has to be militarized. They were wrong on Hamdi, they were wrong on Hamdan, and it keeps going. And that it is terrible to protect people's rights. I don't think that creates a safe country. This country is special because we have certain values, and due process of law is one of those values. And so I object. I object to holding American citizens without trial. I do not believe that makes us more safe. And I object to saying that everything, there's mandatory military commission and military custody if anyone from abroad commits a crime in this country. The administration has used the flexibility in a way that they have won every single time. There have been no failures. And that's unlike the Bush administration as well. Used the federal courts without failure. They have gotten convictions. The military commissions have failed, essentially. 6 cases over 10, 11 years. And I pointed out the sentences. So to say that what we're doing is to make this country less safe may be good for a 30-second soundbite, but it is not the truth.